te trae por aquí. Cuéntame.
Welcome, listener. Bienvenido oyente to our episodio número 6. I'm Jesenia Chavez.
And I am Jaime Mayorquín. As in previous episodes, we will be serving as your hosts, your guides, your cuento curators for this primarily and so far exclusively Latino, Latina, Latine storytelling podcast, ¿Qué me cuentas?
¿Qué me cuentas tú?
Okay, all right, so here we go. ¿Estás listo?
No, pues ya sabes. I am pretty excited to share these stories and see where these storytellers take us.
The theme this time is Vámonos de Viaje. Stories about those family vacations, trips with friends across the globe, or even a solo bus ride across town. And we are glad you're joining us. Y no necesitas ni gasolina ni pasaporte, okay? So our first cuentista is mi prima hermana, Ambar. She has never shared her stories in a formal setting, but she stepped out of her comfort zone and she wrote this story and shared it with us. So we want to create those spaces with all of y'all. You don't have to be a pro. Just give it a shot, y'all. Here is Ambar Sevilla Aguilar with her story, Family of 4.
Growing up, I didn't really think I had vacations because when I was off from school, I didn't do much. My mom and dad always work, but we did take vacations. We wouldn't go every year. We would go cuando se podía, cuando había dinero. My vacations consisted of going to Mexico to visit our abuelitas and visit the family. My mom is from a small town in Chihuahua named Dolores, and my dad is from the city, Guadalajara, Jalisco. Two very different places, but both so beautiful. I remember the first time I went to Dolores. My mom, dad, and sister had just gotten their green cards thanks to the amnesty in the 80s, and all they wanted was to visit their hometowns. I remember thinking how different this was to home. I mean, we weren't rich, but at least our restroom was inside the house. At my abuelita Josefina's house, the restroom was outside, and if you had to go at night, you had to grab a flashlight and walk through all the trees and bushes and jump anytime you heard a noise. Para lo miedosa que soy, I would rather hold it. During that specific trip, we took a day trip, un día de campo. Basically, we all go in trucks and set up in an open area in the cerro near the river. The kids ran around playing non-stop, and the women in the family talked and cooked while the tios played the guitars and sang. I'm not sure what happened, but they were supposed to kill a sheep to feed everyone that day. But whoever was in charge made a horrible mistake and killed the female. And she was pregnant. I remember running to the area and seeing the dead sheep and her babies just laying out on the floor. Needless to say, that scarred me for life. Till this day, I cannot see my food alive. My first trip to Guadalajara was not as traumatizing, but it was memorable. We went to visit my abuelita Justina, my dad's mom, and his family. I do remember being happy because the restroom was inside the house, thankfully. We were introduced to everyone, aunts, uncles, primos, and primas, and even sobrinos. You see, I'm the youngest of all the grandkids on my dad's side, so a lot of my cousins were already married and had kids of their own. So I had nephews that were around my age. When my dad introduced me, he told me that I was their tia. I looked at my dad confused, and my nephews looked at me and laughed. On that same trip, my dad also decided to take us to Puerto Vallarta. You see, my dad grew up going there as a kid since it was so close to Guadalajara. I remember getting to the airport clinging to my Bart Simpson doll, excited to go to the beach. The flight was probably the shortest flight ever. I don't even think we were in the air for more than 30 minutes. We were in awe. We stayed in a nice hotel with pools and walking distance from the beach. We took guided tours that took us to these beautiful places. We even got to see where they filmed parts of the movie Predator. We took a boat trip, and my poor mom got so seasick that she did not enjoy that trip at all. We were only there for 3 days, but those 3 days were amazing. We enjoyed Puerto Vallarta so much that we went back one more time. These 2 trips hold a very special place in my heart because they were the only time that my little family of 4 got to go on a wonderful summer vacation. Sure, I went back to Dolores and Guadalajara a few more times, but we never took another trip together. My sister is 8 years older than me, and she was starting high school and then getting ready to go to college. And we just couldn't schedule another trip as a family of 4. Since getting married in 2014, my husband and I have had the privilege to take some very awesome vacations together. We've been to Cancun, Cabo, La República Dominicana, Costa Rica, Bahamas, New York, Chicago, Florida, Texas, and we even managed to go to Europe in 2018. We spent 2 awesome weeks traveling from London to Paris to Rome and Madrid. It was a trip to remember. Everyone tells me that we should travel and take vacations because we have no kids right now. But once we do have kids, that's all going to stop. I hope that when we do have a family, we will be able to take our children on vacations. I want our children to hold those memories close to their hearts just like I do. I want them to explore the world around them. Maybe I didn't get to explore the world as a kid, but I got to spend time with my family of 4, in their happy places. And I wouldn't change that for the world.
Gracias, prima, for reminding me of the outhouse in Dolores. Muy scary for sure. And I hope you caught a glimpse of her kind heart. Tia Panchita would be so proud. Having our family and our close friends that are like family share on our podcast to try out storytelling, to do this thing we're so passionate about is a real treat. It really is. As a matter of fact, up next, I know Jaime is really excited that he was able to get his brother to come through con un cuento para ustedes. Here is José Mayorquín with his story, The Political Type.
I didn't tell my parents I was going to Cuba. At the time, it was forbidden for citizens of the U.S. to visit the communist island. It still might be, but that's besides the point. And it's not the reason I kept it from them. You see, my dad and I weren't exactly seeing eye to eye on many things in those days, especially when it came to my sudden interest in left-wing politics. We had already had many heated arguments about my participation in student protests at UC Berkeley, or the People's Republic of Berkeley, as some like to call it, due to its anti-establishment hippie subculture. But I wasn't the political type, whatever that means. I was an overly sensitive Morrissey fan who fell in over his head at a good school. But when a string of anti-immigrant laws were introduced in California, starting with the infamous Prop 187, a fire was lit under my nalgas and the activist in me was born. ¿Y a ti qué chingados te importa si tú naciste aquí? My dad would ask. Dedícate a tus estudios y no andes con esas pendejadas. The irony of it, of course, is that my dad is himself an immigrant. I felt obligated to stand up for him and his paisanos, but he didn't see it that way. He wasn't the political type either. He was the economic type, the work like a mule so that his kids don't have to type. As he saw it, my extracurricular activities weren't just a distraction from my studies. They were putting me in real danger, the kind of danger that befalls idealistic, overzealous students at the hands of governments, the kind of danger that resulted in the disappearance of thousands of student protesters in Mexico City in 1968, the kind of danger that can shell-shock an entire generation and dissuade them from becoming the political type, and much less a communist. So when I buy my ticket for Cuba, I keep it to myself. It was my 3rd year in college, and I was studying abroad in El DF. I attend UNAM, Mexico City's version of UC Berkeley on steroids. There, I iron out the wrinkles in my pocho Spanish, learn Mexican history, take courses on world revolutions, and to my dad's epic displeasure, even join a student congregation which met with members of the Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional, Los Zapatistas. My days as a self-absorbed emo kid were now a distant memory. How could anyone withdraw into the depressing lyrics of a narcissistic British alt-rock singer when there's so much injustice in the world? Yes, I know what you're thinking, and you're not wrong. I was in fact drinking the communist Kool-Aid. I had become an idealist, a truth seeker, and probably anti-capitalist as well. So when a professor presented me with a chance to visit Cuba, Latin America's very own Marxist utopia, I eagerly accepted and served myself another helping of Kool-Aid. There's no racism in Cuba, I was told. Everyone lives in harmony regardless of their skin color. There's no classism, they said, because there are no social classes. There's no crime in Cuba, they professed. Material wealth is immaterial, and everyone is content with what they have. Did I believe these things to be true? No. Did I want to believe them? Yes. There were 10 of us who made the trip. Most like me were college students from the U.S. When we land at Havana's Jose Marti International Airport, we're greeted by two good-looking men who introduce themselves as our host and members of the Ministerio del Interior. Rigo is blonde and hazel-eyed. Hector is a dark Afro-Latino. I think it must be true what they say about the racial harmony thing here. Our hosts drive us through beautiful parts of the city on the way to our hotel. We see colorful murals all along the journey. Viva la revolución, muerte al imperialismo, hasta la victoria siempre, and other propaganda painted alongside images of the heroes of the revolution, Fidel, Raúl, Camilo, and everyone's favorite Marxist icon, Che. We arrive at our hotel across the street from La Universidad de La Habana. Rigo and Hector help us with our luggage and say their goodbyes from just outside the hotel. Apparently, Cubans, except for hotel employees, are not allowed to enter the property, not just our hotel, but every hotel, and a bunch of other designated tourist areas we later discover. We settle into our rooms, assemble into smaller groups, and head out to explore the area before dark. As we leave the hotel, we're immediately approached by two young locals who offer to show us around, and we decline. But they persist, and after a few blocks of flirting with the girls and banter, they've won us over with their charm. They invite us to a friend's bar, and we accept, happy to hang out with a couple locals. We walk and walk and walk for a while as the sun fully sets. Eventually, we turn into a dark, rundown residential area. It's a good thing there's no crime in Cuba, I think, as my brain tries to process all the red flags I see and the ones I might have missed. After a bit more walking, I accept that we've fallen prey to a classic tourist trap, and finally muster the courage to declare it's time to go back. But this doesn't come without a confrontation and a robbery. We later learn that this is a common occurrence. Their usual MO is to lure trusting tourists to fake restaurants and charge them insane prices for meager meals, and if they refuse to pay, well, they use more aggressive tactics. After hours of walking and finding our way back to the hotel, we're surprised to see our government hosts Rigo and Hector talking to a pair of Cuban police officers. Off to the side, one of our female travel companions is in tears, being comforted. We learn that she had splintered off from her group with a Cuban man she'd met that evening and was raped. After that gut punch our first night in Cuba, a dark cloud loomed over the rest of our trip. We visited museums and historical landmarks. We attended a performance by Cuba's world-renowned National Ballet. We sunbathed on pristine beaches and swam in crystal-clear Caribbean waters. Yet, all the beauty, cultural heritage, and revolutionary spirit was marred by the betrayal many of us felt in the discovery that there is in fact crime in Cuba, and violent crime at that. Soon after returning to Mexico City, I told my parents I'd gone to Cuba. My dad reacts as expected, and I choose not to engage with him. I don't have the energy, but mostly I'm still sorting things out. It was one of the most profound learning experiences of my life, seeing the good, the bad, the very bad, and the complicated of a society forced to live out an experiment in revolutionary governance. Yes, I lost a bit of my idealism on that trip, but I'm still an idealist and a hopeless romantic who believes that idealism is a worthwhile pursuit. And just like every romance can come with painful letdowns, they can ultimately make us wiser, our hearts stronger, and the journey that much sweeter.
There's so much in that story that I didn't even know, and that's one of the great things about having this podcast. We learn so much about our loved ones as we listen along with the listener. I feel that a lot of his inclination towards political activism kind of like became or morphed into, what's the word I'm looking for, manifested into the career that he has now as an Emmy award-winning producer for ABC. on race and culture news specials on Vista LA, and most of what he produces involves highlighting the beauty of our people and culture as well as other minority groups to kind of counter the negative images and stories that typically fill the news cycle. It's pretty clear that I'm proud of him. I feel like with family, I see his accomplishments as my own. And I've tried to see his Emmys as my own, but he refuses to let me take one of them home with me. And he's so modest and humble that he's probably hating that I'm mentioning any of this. And far more than me, I'm not proud to admit he's very close to our Mexican roots and visits my dad in Acaponeta, Nayarit whenever he can. And someone else whose people are from Acaponeta, coincidentally, but perfect for my segue, is our next storyteller, a wonderful artist, actor, and human being. This is Marlene Luna with Iceland or Bust.
"2011 started out lost and confused. I was unpacking religious trauma, grieving the loss of my father, and feeling like most artistic 20-somethings under a quarter-life crisis, spiritually broken and generally depressed. It was really hard for me to make sense of why I only got to know my dad in the last couple years of his life, especially when I wasn't even sure what I believed in anymore. We tried to pack those last few years with tons of memories to make up for lost time. I got to cackle at his jokes. He cried with me when I got my heart broken for the millionth time. We talked about his absence throughout my childhood, and we got some closure. I got to see the excitement on his face when I told him all about my hopes and dreams for the future. And before I knew it, he was gone. I was really angry, and I coped by numbing myself to it. To everything. I found myself detached and numb to even the happier moments in my life. There wasn't much to look forward to, and I felt lost and totally alone. It was right then and there that my friend Paul called me up and said, "Let's go to Iceland!" And I said, "Hell yeah!" Paul and I met as high school drama geeks that bonded over our mutual obsession for one of the most influential, unique, and significant artists of our generation, Icelandic singer Björk. He worked at an airline at the time and had a sweet hookup, so I paid little to nothing for a round-trip flight. The Icelandic economy tanked, so our good old American dollar was worth 114 of their krona, which meant I was ready to ball out in Iceland. Everything just aligned for me to go, right when I needed it. I couldn't wait to see the place that made Björk and experience the land that made her proclaim that nature was her religion. Vámonos! On our first official morning in Reykjavik, we discovered that Björk was actually having a show at Harpa Concert Hall that night. It was to be the last of the Icelandic tour dates. We tried really hard not to get our hopes up, and we just walked over to the venue and saw about getting tickets. The eternal pessimist in me was already kind of getting ready for the letdown. I was saying things to myself like, I'm just grateful to be in Iceland. How cool is it to be in Iceland at the same time as Björk? If we don't get to see her tonight, it's totally cool. This trip is totally fine. It's still dope. It's fine. It's fine. I swear to God, I almost lost my shit when I asked the snooty box office guy if there were any seats left, and he responded with, "Yes, 2 but only front row. 10,816 krona each." I took out my cash like that fool was dancing for singles, and I spent the best $94 of my life to see my favorite artist of all time in her hometown. I couldn't believe it. There was this moment before the show kicked off where I sat in my seat and I just took it all in. I was like, holy shit, I'm really here. How the fuck did I get so lucky? I thought about my dad and how excited he would have been for me. I felt him especially close on that night. When Björk made her entrance onto the stage in all her sparkly little space alien glory and screeched, "And if you feel like dancing, don't stop yourselves," she took us on a musical voyage through her most recent album, Biophilia, her love letter to nature. I sang, I cried, I danced for my life, especially when she hit us with a few jams off her first 2 albums and some of the hits. Every sensation I had numbed myself to came rushing back to me. Seeing Björk in Iceland shocked me back into seeing just how unexpectedly dope life could be. This felt like a setup for all the natural beauty that Iceland had in store for me over the next couple days. I got to truly understand nature as a spiritual experience. Before this trip, I don't think I'd ever just marveled at nature. I experienced Thingvellir, a cultural, geological, and UNESCO World Heritage Site that marks the crest of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and the boundary between the North American and Eurasian tectonic plates. Earthquake shit. It's these dizzyingly tall, smooth black walls of rock that split apart and create this beautiful corridor to walk through. These two giant forces of nature coming together, shifting, colliding, subsuming, constantly striving for a perfect fit. It reminded me of all the ways that life will shift, recenter, and position us to find our way back to ourselves. Seeing the heavy force of the water and feeling the icy mist on my cheeks from Gulfis waterfall felt like I saw the Creator. Someone, something had to create this, all of this. It's just so overwhelmingly beautiful to be by coincidence. We experienced the Blue Lagoon, this geothermal spa, and I just let the milky, healing silica waters cleanse me. I felt baptized with a renewed sense of gratitude, clarity, and passion for my life in a way that I had never felt before. I was so thankful for everything and everyone that led me to this experience, and it suddenly became clear to me. The small amount of time my dad and I had to get to know each other was more than enough for him to know how to guide me and uplift me from the other side. I felt him especially close because he became an ancestor. I was never alone. I had a new sense of wonder and excitement for the future, and I knew that I was being guided there. This November will be 10 years since Paul and I hit Reykjavik, and our friendship is over 20 years strong. Life has kept being unexpectedly dope. I found my amazing partner, Marcos, who keeps me cackling. I see my dad's face in the eldest of my 2 daughters, and I'm pursuing my passions and all those hopes and dreams I told him about. But whenever I find myself feeling lonely or lost again, I reconnect with nature and the forces guiding me. I blast the Biophilia album. I play the song Solstice, and I shout the lyrics. And then you remember that you yourself, you are a light bearer, receiving radiance from others, flickering sun flame, unpolished earth in palm of hand.
Okay, well, when I first listened to the story, I was on a hike and was openly crying in public. Everything aligned for her on this trip. I mean, Bjork tickets for $90, that's unheard of, right? And if you don't know who Bjork is, well, I think you've probably been living under a rock. But you might know her from the infamous swan dress she wore to the Oscars, mocking, the styles of the Oscars. Anyhow, Google it if you don't know. Marlene, she really delivered a beautiful story of how things can work out. And, the reminders are everywhere if you are open to see them. Our next cuentista sees the signs everywhere, the connections and the struggles. Les presentamos a Alex Alpharaoh sharing his lyrical piece titled, If Only.
If only I could become somebody, not just the sum of 2 bodies aftermath, who considered the consequences only after the fact. No immaculate conception. Contraceptives are too expensive, sex education was at a minimum, while adult supervision is a premium, and neither could be afforded. The only Planned Parenthood my parents had in their neighborhood was the beating my scared mom bared as my father hit her repeatedly in the tummy, trying to force an abortion of the baby growing within. I guess violence has always been a part of my history. Kicking her down a flight of steps, yelling obscenities, asking where she has slept, and demanding to know who my father would be. This is how I began my life's journey. If only I could be more than just a manifestation of tainted love and promiscuous penetration, which led to 2 teens getting wed, locked in a web of expectations laced with disappointment, pouring out as tears from the eyes of soon-to-be grandparents. Holding tongues and heavy breaths, sighing at the sight of their offspring as they pass through a rite of passage in order to inherit their ancestral cosmic debt. These parents witness the actualization of their failure as guardians. Arduous watching, each child accept regurgitated vows in silence. As the blood of Christ is passed around in the chalice, neither one truly knows or fully understands the challenges that are coming full speed ahead like an avalanche, yet they still drink the blessed blood, clueless to what is what. The way a 14-year-old doesn't truly know what she is repenting for. Forced to confess to a stranger veiled in darkness right before her ill-fated marriage, because this is tradition. It's the way it's supposed to be. Soon the water will break, like my mother's heart, each time she admitted to her reflection her role in my disposition. She would comfort herself by repeating her mantra, "I'm doing the best I can, considering my situation." See, my bitter mama is but a little girl that covers the bruise underneath her left eye because Dad's right cross tends to connect each time. If only love and common sense could be synonymous, instead of leading to an ominous tragedy because my parents' love story would be too sad to qualify as a Shakespearean comedy. If only Dad had gotten around to listening to Biggie's commandments, they would have made him a better drug dealer, or Tupac's wisdom, he might have been inclined to listen. He might have become a healer. Fuck $1 in a dream. Make money, even if you gotta sell crack. Dad had delusions and Jim Beam to keep him from caving into his insecurities as a young wetback. He's the original dreamer, who traded in his own so that I could cultivate mine into maturity, which means my dreams were already tainted with impurities. I ponder all this as I scrub the fatigue off my face with cold water and diluted dish soap, doing this routine for the 7th day in a row. My nose is raw from doing blow. How the fuck else do you think I managed to get up and go? It's all good, it's alright, fuck all day, fuck all night. Crooning to the DMX bootleg disc, careful not to drop the stolen Sony CD Walkman as I take a piss with one hand and hold the contraband with the other. I slick my jet black hair using a pocket comb and a shitload of 3 Flowers pomade. I'm ripe and rotten at age 18. A high school dropout, kicked out because I'm too loud and I don't respect my mother's house. I rent a room down the street on 48th and Arlington, because fuck paying mom rent. I should live for free, goddammit. Self-entitled with 3 entry-level titles, when combined, don't even give me enough to pay rent and a car title. If only I didn't have to share a bathroom with 9 adult immigrants who look at me with jealous sentiment because they can tell by my sentences that I'm not like them. I hate showering there because I have to wear sandals or risk getting fungus between the webbing of my toes. If I forget my caddy, I'll be out of shampoo in less than a week. Thank God the rent's cheap because the bills creep like TLC. While the THC hits my bloodstream thanks to the tightly rolled Philly blunt that dangles out the corner of my lips while I untangle the laces on my worn out lugs. Those shoes haven't been fashionable for 5 years. My rationale right now is focused on survival. No time to entertain disappointment and tears. Living on the edge and in denial about the missteps and mistakes that brought me to this place. If only I didn't have to beat the sunrise. I leave the house just before first light, at 5:15. Catching bus 209 to Pico Boulevard, I almost get hit by a car as I jaywalk across the street in order not to miss bus number 30. Fuck you too, bitch! I clap back with a middle finger, my closest salutation to a good morning. I clock in at exactly 6:30 into work at the rehab center of Beverly Hills. An upscale jail for the old and infirm, stripped of wealth because you can't take any of it with you into hell. This is where the rich ditch their undesirables. This is where I met several Holocaust survivors, the death defiers, who deferred their ends either through bargain, luck, or both. Their tattoos are different from mine. 5 numbers in a line means they weren't meant to be alive but were rescued in time. 5 tattoos on my arm mean I'm trying to cover up where I committed self-harm. I put away my backpack as I'm immediately ransacked by the long workday. Daydreams filled with visions of money and fame makes my poverty torture because I work for people with massive fortunes, yet I can't understand why they're so miserable, unhappy. I'm the one who's miserable. Held ransom by tiresome nights, 3 hours of sleep, 3rd straight double shift this week. No OT, 2 different employee IDs means I put in over 60 hours this week. Net pay? Not enough to raise a baby, let alone build a college fund. Words like destitute, ignorant, dumb are used to describe me. If only they could see my talent. If only I was given a chance. Undergraduate in the game. Overlooked, underpaid, overworked, underestimated. Writing rhymes during my lunch break in the parking lot, away from prying eyes with cigarette breaths and cancer spots. I go back to work after 15 minutes, but my hands ache to the bone from the hot water I used to wash dishes. Stack the tray, pressure spray, push it away into the industrial washer, repeat. Lacking pay? Fuck today. If only I'd paid attention to all of my teachers' defeat. Working the tray line with a reformed convict who's grateful to be outside, doing for a living what he learned inside. He's the best kind of employee, one who has been broken into submission. Today we call that the sunken place, but then all I saw was a Negro that was grateful for his chance to be free and able. Bible thumping because he made a promise to Jesus. He jokes with Jesus, who's his prep cook assistant. He tells him, if only I had that youngster's youth with my wisdom, man, I tell you, I would have never gone to prison. He refers to 20 long years in the penitentiary over a felony that could have been avoided with a fatherly pep talk. He's still imprisoned inside the outline of the white chalk as he pats his eyes with a white cloth and tries not to choke on his memories. I clock out and walk back hurriedly to the bus stop. If I miss it, I'll add an extra hour walk to my commute. I reach the bus before it leaves me, show my bus pass hastily, sit in the back and commune with my dad's memory. I then take out my pen and notepad, put my headphones on and let my imagination flow, allowing my thoughts to roam during the 2 long and empty bus rides home. If only I could get out of the hood. If only I wasn't misunderstood. If only I could be taken seriously. If only I wasn't so damn angry and furious. If only. If only. If only.
I don't even know what to say after that. His piece speaks for itself. Alex's work consistently is just so vivid and raw and generous. I remember seeing that show several years ago, his show Wet, a documented journey, and just being on the edge of my seat through most of it as Alex owned that stage all by himself as he told this story like no one I've ever seen before. And now he's like traveled the country with his show and he just continues to create and grow. And I love that for this prompt of Vámonos de Viaje, he took us back to him at 18 at his beginnings, full of dreams, on his bus rides to work. I just have so much gratitude and respect for him for sharing and for shaking things up on our little podcast. And I also have gratitude and respect for our next cuentista. She is one of the creators of the annual All Latina Play Festival, Chicanas, Cholas y Chisme at Casa 0101 in Boyle Heights. Here is the legendary Lindsey with her story, Comfort Zone.
Before I retired and while at work, I'd glance at Southwest Airlines' $79 getaway flight specials. The flights went to places like Wichita, Kansas, Manchester, New Hampshire, Tucson, Arizona, Jackson, Mississippi, Odessa, Texas, and Cleveland, Ohio, just to name a few. I also want to visit Maine and Nova Scotia, even though Southwest doesn't fly there. I grew up in a family that didn't take vacations. We did leave LA once to visit family in El Paso, Texas for the 4th of July. We didn't fly, but instead drove there in our 1960s Galaxy station wagon with plans to cross the desert in the middle of the night because AC in the station wagon consisted of opening a window. Drove straight through. No stopping at cute diners for dinner or breakfast, but instead, if we got hungry, we were handed a smashed bologna sandwich and a warm grape soda. Upon arriving in El Paso, staying at a motel ni que nada during this vacation, our relatives would be insulted if we rented a room and didn't stay with them. They would be talking shit about us for days. Ay, si mira nomás, los ricos, they rented a room at a motel. Ya que se movieron a California, they're too good to stay at my house now. Staying at my tia's house, us kids would find ourselves sleeping on the floor, but when you don't know that there are options like renting a room, you don't know what you're losing out on. This habit of not taking vacations would follow me into adulthood. If I did travel, it was only to visit family, and I wouldn't rent a room either. Sleeping arrangements visiting family would range from sleeping on couches or futons or spare bedrooms that once belonged to cousins that had long left home. Eventually, a well-traveled friend of mine invited me to New Orleans for a 3-day trip. Within that short amount of time, I made lifelong friends, met several writers, and read at an open mic. New Orleans became my spiritual home, and I've traveled there once or twice a year for the past 15 years. On these visits to New Orleans, I still had my day job and used my vacation time to go there and work on my plays. So when there's work to do, it can hardly be called a vacation. I stayed with friends and with some exceptional meals at some of my favorite restaurants. Most of the time while I was there, I cooked. My daughter's children, on the other hand, now ages 12 and 9, have traveled to more cities and stayed at more hotels and resorts than I have. They actually travel to places where they don't know anyone and have never visited. They see the sights, take tours, and eat all of their meals at restaurants. Eventually, I would like to visit major cities and places outside the U.S., but for now, I want to visit smaller cities where I can walk around, look at its architecture and markers of change and growth or parts abandoned, and find out why. Talk to folks while at a coffee shop and become friends with the waitresses, excavate through a city's past by visiting its thrift stores, and spend time in their confessionals, the bars. Visiting these cities may not sound too exciting, but it's not excitement I'm looking for. I'm curious for the stories, real and imagined, those I'll hear from the waitresses and bar patrons, the ones that I'll imagine while walking down a street, wondering what's going inside the house that I've just passed. A friend from New Orleans came to visit me soon after Katrina. We were stuck in traffic near the Beverly Center on a Saturday afternoon. He turned to look at me a bit stunned and said, "I feel like I'm in a movie about LA." I drove him to the East Side and South LA and got the same response. He recognized the First Street Bridge from various commercials, and when I took him to South LA, he remembered seeing that landscape in Boys in the Hood. Living in a large city like Los Angeles, it's easy to assume that with all its diversity, we have everything that we need here. But I think that when someone moves to LA from another city or country, they adjust to life here and join the grind just to keep their heads above water to pay the rent, making us more of a homogeneous city with lots of different looking folks trying hard to maintain our traditions while running the rat race. Because LA traffic sucks, pre-pandemic, I was guilty of staying within my comfort zone, either socially or geographically. On rare occasions, I traveled more than 10 miles outside of my neighborhood, only to attend something within my own social circle where we all pretty much agree on everything. Maybe it's because of this that I'm willing to fly to these other cities, get out of my comfort zone and meet people who live different lives, hear their stories, their challenges, and in doing so, gain awareness and empathy. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was offered an early retirement package. I took it, and for the last 19 months, I've been living alone, relegated to my apartment without a trip anywhere on the horizon. In the meantime, I thought that I'd at least like to explore my own city, but I'm afraid to get out of my car even though I'm vaccinated. At present, I'm working on the anxiety of crossing over the threshold of my own front door. I'm trying to stay alive so that I can eventually get to Wichita, Kansas, Manchester, New Hampshire, Tucson, Arizona, Jackson, Mississippi, Odessa, Texas, Cleveland, Ohio, Maine, and Nova Scotia.
I love how she is trying to step out of her comfort zone. You know, and the 10-mile radius we keep. Because Los Angeles, let's face it, everybody, it is a very segregated city. And we do stick to our communities or the people that we are comfortable with. And I really take this as a challenge to get out of our comfort zones and try to explore new cities, new places. Even Cleveland, Ohio sounds cool, coming from Lindsey. I really enjoyed the theme because I feel like the storytellers took us on ideological journeys and explored the freedoms we have and the magic that can happen when you travel. What do you think, Jaime?
Well, I agree. I mean, for many reasons, this episode has been particularly special to me, but I also feel like we need to acknowledge that we're, in a way, in a place of privilege when it comes to traveling outside of the U.S. It can be way more complicated for our undocumented fellow Latinos, Latines, and other refugees and immigrants. There's a lot of liberties that in the past I think I took for granted, so I just thought we should mention that.
For sure. And those stories, those voices are an important part of our story as a culture. We plan to dedicate an episode to that. Y muy pronto, pero primero our next episode's theme will be Los que se nos fueron, stories about those who have passed on, but mostly focusing on how they lived. It's a bit on the nose for November y Dia de los Muertos, but don't judge us. We love our dearly departed, okay? Like usual, we'd like to thank our storytellers for sharing their stories and emotional energy with us. También muchas gracias a Alfredo Avila for our theme song.
A big thank you to the band Sister Mantos and the Tracks for allowing us to use their music. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook for more information on them and our cuentistas at Que Me Cuentas Pod.
Gracias por escuchar y por el apoyo. Your support, comments y todo lift us up.
As promised, a gracias shout out to Arevalo 2207,
Hombre 076,
and Uistin for writing us beautiful 5-star reviews. You can also support us and these stories by simply recommending us to your friends. This has been Que Me Cuentas. Hasta la próxima.
Bye, listeners. We love you.
¿Qué me cuentas tú?